and whatnot so that they could confer the stuff onto their family. Other interesting oddball level stuff like mastership, and this sort of corresponds with Ray, which we'll get to in a minute, Dr. Ray, where the only ability to confer like a Reiki 1 or a Reiki 2 degree thing onto the rest of the family or whatever who was working on something, or interesting things like that. So I mean, there are unofficial folks out there that you will run across every now and then. And I understand that one of them in Florida is writing a book, and I'm looking forward to that being released. She went on to become a doctor. She was a kid at the time, and she's gone on to become a doctor. She's writing this anthology of symbols, and in there is this little treatise on her experience. I'm looking forward to it. That should be fun. So Reiki's in America now, and it's Christian and all of that. Scott is traveling around and doing a lot of healing and beginning to initiate other people. And if you look at the spread of the initiated masters, it's a pretty long and lengthy spread. In the last year, I've taught I don't know how many classes, but I will tell you this: in those classes, they were all different. Everyone was different from each other. Was the procedure essentially the same? Yes, but I've also gained a great deal of insights over the last year that facilitated this, which is a completely different class from what I did even earlier in this year. So when you look at it spread out over a period of 10 years, imagine the growth that occurs in that time frame. So what you have are a whole series of masters spread out there at different periods in that growth process. Some stuff stuck, some stuff was dropped, some stuff was added. It's this huge anthology of things. She's reported to have given all of her masters a different daikomios, or a different Hanshaze Shonen symbol, and there are certainly a lot of those out there, so that might be valid. And some of them are dead, so there's no way of checking out this stuff to be absolute fringe of it. And also in handing out different daikomyo symbols, and I have on file symbols in her own handwriting that were given out at classes that were different just from the Peoria area alone, from people living in the Peoria area alone that caught me in a holistic bookstore here or there, or something like that. So that's very telling. Because Reiki has become rather dogmatic. As these teachers were taught, what happened is, if you were made to wait before being initiated to the next level, you just sort of assumed that was right. All of the trainings were very one-on-one. So that became sort of a dogma with this waiting time thing. Other dogmas that are out there are just wide and varied, and we'll probably hit upon a lot of them today, just as we go through, in the space of churning through all this information and all this system stuff. So Takata dies eventually in 1980, and what ensues after that is this nasty political battle that did a good job of destructuring Reiki, essentially, which may be good, which may be bad. I don't know. I kind of feel both ways on that in my thought process. But it doesn't really matter because it's the way it is. We're all sitting in this room because that happened. Here's what happened. She had evidently promised a lady named Dr. Barbara Ray, who founded the American Reiki Association and the American International Reiki Association, and then later changed it to the Radiance Technique International, had evidently promised her, to make her the quote-unquote Grand Master of Reiki after she passed on. And on her deathbed or thereabouts, unbeknownst to Barbara Ray, gave it to her granddaughter. I read through that certificate and go, the Grand Master or what? But not everybody does, and so there was this huge political struggle that ensued between these two warring camps, and they just kind of staked each other out. And the Reiki Alliance and Phyllis were on one side, and Barbara Ray and her group were on the other side. And so out of Barbara Ray, suddenly you see this anthology of this multi-level system coming out, where it's the only true Reiki, and a lot of terms getting copywritten and stuff like that. Here are two materials from Barbara Ray, and here's her picture. Again, all of this material I bring with me so that and this isn't every book that I have on Reiki by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of the books I consider just really fluffy, and so I don't carry them with me necessarily because they don't really say anything new. So out of this power struggle, essentially you have her form of Reiki becoming known as the radiance technique. And you're going to be hard-pressed to run into the radiance technique. They really stick to themselves. I mean, if you mail them stuff, a lot of times they don't mail anything back to you. It's really kind of an unusual organization. And it's been taken to very high and pricey levels as well. To go all the way through her system, you're going to spend over $30,000. That's a lot of money. And last I'd heard, even at that level, you still couldn't initiate a master who could initiate another master, which is still holding that close to the vest. There are 3 people in the system that can do that. But I think that's very scary, sort of. So anyway, you have this multi-level Reiki system coming out. And what you find as you go around is that this has completely evolved over the course of years. If you find people that took it from her before Takata died or shortly after Takata died, and really she seems to have started radically altering her system around 1983. But if you go in the periods before that, what you run into are people who were taught exactly the same way as everybody else on the planet. So out of this we have now the other camp, the Phyllis Furamoto camp, kept it very traditional according to their own standards of traditional. And eventually something happened where people started to, masters started to initiate enough other people that they started to meet each other on the road, and symbols were different. And so then there's this huge thing there about, mine's real, mine's real, mine's real, mine's real, all of that. But think of this, what if she did hand out a different Hanshaze Shonin symbol to everybody, Then you've got 22 people out there teaching a different Hanshaze Shonin symbol, so eventually they're going to overlap, and then they're fighting about which one's right, I've got different symbols from the lady, so, she was very intuitive in the way she taught, and she was an exceptional teacher, and she was an exceptional healer, and she was very powerful, and we all owe her a lot. I'm not discrediting her in any way, or the myth that she was, or the legacy that she's left it with, Perhaps it's best that this is shrouded in mystery. But nonetheless, the intuitive teaching style left a lot of variety in the symbols out there, and a lot of variety in information and practices out there as well. And she never wrote anything. She never laid it all down. There are some sets of tapes out there where she discusses it. There are some class sets of tapes out there that I'm trying hard to obtain. I have here with me a handout. This is another thing that we can order from Anne. I'll set this out here. You've probably all seen this by now. It's just a cover to protect us underneath it. What we have inside this is class notes taken from a Reiki first degree class, August 29th, 1975, by this guy who took incredibly meticulous notes. That was midway through her teaching. And there's a procedure in here that pretty much vanished by the end of it, as well as a lot of other really neat stuff. And it goes through, she evidently covered a great deal of stuff about specific conditions and stuff like that, and it's all in here. So I'll leave this up here for you to look at on break or whatever you want.
Well, I met a lady and initiated her to second and third in Hawaii who was initiated first degree by Mr. Hayashi, by Dr. Hayashi when he was there, and taught some classes at her home. She was 73, this has been about 3 years ago, so she's 76 now. But she told me that she believes, she was 17 or 18, and her mother had all of her siblings initiated to first degree. She said the picture we have of Dr. Hayashi looks just exactly like what her memory of him is, and that it was $50 a person for first level in the 1930s. So there again, I've actually connected with someone.
Oh, that's interesting. That's cool.
Well, yeah, one thing on this history, both the write-up and the little tape that Mrs. Takata made, and they call it the story of Reiki, not the history of Reiki. So people should, when they see that word story, say, okay, this is a story just like the movie.
Exactly. And yet, you read through the stuff and it's been printed up as the biblical truth, and that's why I think it's important to make your exact point. exactly what I'm going for.
In about 7 books that I've read about the same story, everybody tells the same thing differently anyway, so
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
it's just the idea of the thing to get it across with some sort of a punchline to convince somebody it's worth something.
Oddly enough, Barbara Ray's the only one that doesn't. In her book, she treats it as a complete myth and pretty much glazes over it. So that's interesting. Okay, let's go from here onward and upward. My God, into the Reiki jungle. Certainly spans out from here. The alliance has really been losing a lot of strength. Maybe it's because it costs hundreds of dollars to do it a year. I don't know. I kind of look at that and no. Thanks.
Do you know how much it costs to belong to the alliance?
I think it's $200 a year still.
For what?
I do sort of like what they're doing. They do, they try to uphold the whole ethical, spiritual kind of standard side of it, but at the same time, I think that's remaining a little bit too focused. And they've loosened their standards periodically, kind of along the way a little bit. Probably because, when you look at the newsletter, or if you get information from them, there's always this huge column of people who've dropped out. The last one I got, there were like 50 people on it. So that's a lot. That's a lot of people. Services that they provide are as far as I'm concerned, sort of from my standpoint. But I do encourage you to write them their addresses because write them and see what they have to send and make your own decision on that. That's your own determination by all means. Takata was a real traditionalist. Despite the fact that she changed the symbols, I think it's interesting that her respect and her sacredness and all of the things that she did stress about this. And these class notes even are bootleg. From this time she was still totally against all that. So it's interesting that there were tapes from later classes and stuff. But it's interesting what got transferred over from a dogmatic standpoint with all of this, because what we're left with is all of this rigidity regarding the healing system itself, and what she had was this dogmatic rigidity in keeping it, a very kind of spiritual, sacred, respectful thing, and those polarities are sort of inverted. So I think that's kind of odd. And I also think that there's a great deal of things to be said about not making this into the next great religious movement thing, because it's sort of headed that direction. It really is. Unless you're blind to it, how much more could you ask for? We have our Jesus figure in Takata, somebody who never wrote anything down. That there's not a lot from, just vague references. Stuff like this, it's mushroomed from there. Sects are developing between the Radiance people and Arthur Robertson and his American Reiki Master Association in Florida, and the Sai Baba stuff from Kathleen, and the camps are out there. And Kathleen, fortunately, is one of the people. She's a very sweet person. I really like her. I really enjoyed spending time with her, and she is very inclusive and she's very open. She's not nearly as dogmatic and rigid as some, but nonetheless, the little camps are out there. I think there's a great danger of not making that into So that was actually the purpose of putting together this class, was to give people an overview of everything that's out there and say, look, it's all basically the same thing, and this is your training wheels for evocative healing. That's what this is. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay. The symbols that are included in your materials in terms of the traditional second degree symbols are in Phyllis Furamoto's own handwriting. It's the handout that she'll send you. I've seen it from 2 sources. I've seen it from 3 or 4 sources now. I've seen it from Jeannie Greening. I've seen it from who mailed directly to her and received that directly back. I've seen it from William Rand's school. I've seen it from Kathleen. So it's out there. I choose to use these symbols that I've included on this page, which, like I said, are in her own handwriting, simply because I feel that they are by far the most popular ones out there.